Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
I need some sort of interplay. It's going to be a long hearing then. My name is Jim Malatris. I'm the co-chair of the New York State Complete Count Commission. I'm joined by our great Secretary of State, Rosanna Rosado, as well as some of our esteemed commissioners who we'll introduce in a moment. Before we get started, I'd like to have Mayor Sheehan and then the county executive, the great Dan McCoy, come up and give some welcoming remarks. Mayor?
Thank you so much, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing and the recognition of the importance of the census. I was actually at the New York Conference of Mayors annual meeting yesterday, and the mayor of Sharon Springs was on the dais interviewing the two men who own Beekman 1602 or 1802, the fabulous Beekman boys that were featured in a reality TV show. And he mentioned that his village had 538 people, and one of the Beekman boys said, "Wait, I thought we were at 547." And he said, "Well, my bartender is also the undertaker, so I have a very precise count." So, you know, in all seriousness, right, we know that there are places where it's very likely that everyone is going to be counted. In a city like Albany with a large student population, where we have 47 languages spoken in our school system, where we have a number of people who are living in poverty, where we have a large homeless population, we know that counting everybody is going to be a bit more challenging. And the work that we are doing and the number of people who are participating in our Complete Count committee demonstrates the commitment of this city to ensure that everyone is counted. So our Complete Count committee is up and running. We've had multiple meetings. At our meeting that we had about a week ago, we actually laid out our timeline for events, for materials that we need to get out there, organizations that we need to touch, and we identified anybody who was missing from our Complete Count committee. And so we are really enthusiastic about this work. We have a lot of very passionate people from our community-based organizations, from the business community, from our institutions of higher education, from our medical institutions, who understand the importance of ensuring that everyone is counted. And the thing for the city of Albany is that we're so close. We're at that 98,000 and change, and we know that that's an undercount. And if we can get to 100,000, it opens up opportunities for our residents that are not available. There are opportunities and grants that we would then qualify for if we can hit that magic number of 100,001. And so we are fiercely dedicated to achieving that. We know that the state is going to be helpful in that. We hope that we can count on all of our partners to ensure success, to make sure that we have the resources necessary in order to get that complete count. So thank you all for coming today and for making your voices heard. And again, thank you to this panel for understanding how critically important this is, not just to the city of Albany. This is critically important across our entire state. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. And to our two great co-chairs, Secretary of State and Jim Malachos, and the board members, and to everyone on the board. And I actually want to thank the governor for putting such a great board together, because Mayor Sheen's correct. Numbers count, and it turns into federal dollars. And the federal dollars turn into a lot of aid, not just to the counties, to the cities, towns, and villages. And look what just happened with SALT. We have a president on a national level that just likes taking away from democratic states. So this panel really does have their work cut out. And I'm proud to say we're one of the 150 counties in this country that are suing the federal government for the right census for the count. But also, most importantly, is getting the message out there. And I know the federal government's not giving us the money that we need to do an exact count. I thank the state for stepping up. And I'm willing as county executive to step up to the plate here in Albany County to try to match the funds the federal government's not going to give us. Because as the mayor said, every person represents a dollar sign. And I hate to say it that way, but when you're delivering services, and you're delivering services to turn people's lives around, and we have an equity agenda going in the county, it's so important to make sure we get every dollar captured so we can continue to turn people's lives around, give people an opportunity they might not have had, and this is the way we're going to do it. So I don't want to hold the panel up from their important work. I know it's going to be a long meeting. So again, welcome to Albany, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you to the mayor and county executive. I'd now like to turn it over to our great co-chair, the Secretary of State, Rosanna Rosado.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you all for being here. We are excited to be in the Capital Region as we've been traveling throughout the state to hear from all of you. And I would just add that, it feels like we've been talking about the census for a while, and we're going to be talking about the census for a while. I want to remind you that there are going to be some distractions in 2020 and other conversations taking place, but this is kind of the most essential thing that we can do, as citizens of New York, to make sure that, New York is counted correctly, not just for the money, but also for the importance. We've heard around the state that there are real challenges because of the national climate to getting people to step forward. And so what we hope to do, in addition to hearing all of you, is to kind of draft all of you into continuing to have these conversations. This is a conversation at every barbecue this summer. This is the conversation that we can't get tired of, reminding people how important the census is and demystifying a lot of the things they're hearing, due to media coverage and pundits on other sides of things. But thank you, and I look forward to hearing your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Just before we get started, I'd like to have the commissioners introduce themselves, and we'll start with our left with Commissioner Moore.
Hello, excuse me. I'm Lauren Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the Pioneer Library System in Canandaigua, New York. I'm also the Chair of the New York Library Association's Census Task Force and a member of the Finger Lakes Digital Inclusion Coalition.
Good morning. I'm Roberta Reardon. I'm the New York State Commissioner of Labor.
Hi, I'm Andy Beveridge. I'm a professor at Queens College in the Graduate Center of CUNY, and I'm run a data service called Social Explorer, which actually vends census and other data.
Esmeralda Simmons, Executive Director, Center for Law and Social Justice, Medgar College, City University of New York.
And we're also joined by Rich Toby, who is the Executive Director of the Commission, as well as the entire staff. Let's give them a big round of applause for all they do.
I'd like to acknowledge the other staff members who now work on 8 of these sessions. So Elizabeth Barakowski, Matt Hinton, Jim Leary, and Lee Park have all made this possible by their hard work. I want to thank you for what you've done.
And I welcome you to the Rockefeller Institute. It was a co-chair's privilege because we've been traveling so much. We wanted to host you, and plus my car is in the shop, so it solved 2 problems for me. So I appreciate the indulgence. Today we have 2 presentations, one from one of our commissioners. So, of course, Commissioner Reardon will reserve all of her tough questions for Mr. Beveridge. And then we have a number of folks who signed up to present. There's a giant clock that has the number 3. You have 3 minutes, and there's a nice gentleman, Matt, here. He smiles a lot until it gets to 0. And when it gets to 0, he frowns because he wants you to stop speaking. And the reason why we do that, we want to give everybody the equal opportunity to speak. We want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. If you have written testimony, please submit it to the commission, and we include everything on our public record. If you don't have written testimony, but you are inspired to write written testimony afterwards, submit it, and we post everything. The more access to information we have as a commission, the easier it is to make recommendations, and likewise giving the public more information about how important the census is, as well as ways of ensuring a complete and full count is critically important for us, as well as all of the state policymakers. So with that, I thank you. And I'd like to first call up our first presenter, Jennifer Dublin, who is the Assistant Regional Census Manager over recruiting for the Census Bureau. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. So first, I like to say good morning to everyone. I am born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and currently living in Manhattan, so I do understand the importance of the complete count for New York State. I also had the privilege of being the area manager and assistant regional census manager for the 2018 test, which was conducted in Providence, Rhode Island. So today I'll be speaking mainly about some of our preliminary results on the 2018 test in Providence. The preliminary data from the 2018 end-to-end field test showed that approximately 52.3% of the 277,000 housing units self-responded during the test. When that data is further analyzed, the data indicates approximately 56% of the 551,000 residents of Providence were accounted for within housing units that self-responded. Please note, we're going to be able to capture a number of data points on the behaviors of different demographic groups relative to our modes of census data collection. However, the primary objective of the end-to-end test was to evaluate our systems and the capabilities of the systems to perform successfully and integrate effectively with each other, and to evaluate their functionality when being operated by real people in a real field environment. Additionally, the test served as an opportunity to evaluate our field management capabilities, procedures, and tools. The lessons we learned from the test provided an opportunity to improve processes, refine functionality, and modify procedures. The test was useful in these areas. The systems successfully were operated together, and they demonstrated that we could collect data and capture census data securely and effectively. As we would hope from a test, we were able to identify several areas that we could refine and improve to optimize performance before we began to work on scalability performance this year. We also learned key lessons that helped us to design better field operating processes and procedures. Finally, we were able to get an understanding of response rates across different demographic groups. And interestingly enough, the results in this area did not vary much from prior tests and from our expectations. Please note, the data I'm going to share is very preliminary, and we're still in the process of reviewing and editing. It is from the Census unedited file, and it is for operational assessment purposes only. When we are looking at response rates by demographic characteristics, all percentages have been rounded to the nearest whole integer, and the total population has been rounded to the nearest 1,000. Again, it is important to note that the 2018 test results that we're discussing are consistent with past results from other tests we've been conducting during the decade since 2010. In other words, none of the 2018 results on self-response surprised us. This graphic shows the proportion of self-response for each race by person. As I indicated before, 56% of person response data came from self-response. Those who self-identified as white had the highest proportion of self-response at 68%. Asian, 59%. Two or more races at 61%. Each showed proportions of self-response above the overall average response rates. On the other hand, Blacks at 39%, American Indian, Alaska Native at 44%, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders at 37%, all self-responded below the average national response rates. When we look at the modes of self-response, 65% responded on the internet. Those who self-responded and identified as Asian chose to respond on the internet 75% of the time, which was the highest proportion of internet self-response by a racial group. Of the self-respondents that identified as white, 66% responded over the internet. Of those identifying as Black, 54% responded over the internet. This is nearly identical to the number we saw in the 2018 National Content Test, in which 55% of Black respondents did so online. The group with the lowest internet self-response was American Indian and Alaska Native, with only 44% of those self-respondings choosing to do so online. It is important to note here that as compared to self-response proportions, while white was the racial group most likely to self-respond, Asian was the group that used the internet most if they self-responded. Note that this analysis does not control for the male contact strategy. We also know that there are some demographic and socioeconomic differences between areas designated for internet choice compared to internet first. When we add in the layer of self-response via paper, we can see that of those who self-responded, 29% responded via paper. Notice here that Blacks and American Indian and Alaska Native were the only two groups with the paper response as a proportion of all self-response that was higher than the average. You can also see that American Indian and Alaska Native was the only group that preferred to respond via paper. All other racial groups that self-responded preferred to do so online. Finally, when we add in self-response proportion by phone, you can see that of those who self-responded, the proportion of self-response over the phone was only 6%. Now let's turn from racial groups to Hispanic origin. We can see that among people that self-identified as Hispanic, 43% self-responded, and among people identified as non-Hispanic, 67% self-responded. The lower rate of self-response by Hispanic is consistent with what we have observed in prior censuses and in prior research. When looking further at mode of response by Hispanic origin, we see that 68% of self-respondents that identified as non-Hispanic chose to respond over the internet compared to 59% for those that identified as Hispanic. While less than half of those who identified as Hispanic self-responded, when they did self-respond, it appears that they prefer to do so online. As we would expect, when we add in paper, we see that the proportion of those who identified as Hispanic and self-responded via paper was higher than non-Hispanic. And finally, when we layer in the phone, we see that the difference between Hispanic and non-Hispanic in terms of self-proportion via phone was only about 1%. Again, one of the biggest takeaways from these slides on Hispanic origin is that while the proportion of self-response for Hispanics was almost 25% percentage points below non-Hispanics, the disparities among the modes of self-response was less. We will briefly look at the results by household tenure, that is owned or rented. As we would expect based on previous census results, owner-occupied households self-responded at a higher rate, about 75% of the time, compared to 48% of renter-occupied households self-responding, a gap of over 25 percentage points. As you know, renters have long been one of our hard-to-count groups. In the 2010 census, the gap in response between owner and rented-occupied households was 20 percentage points. When looking at modes of self-response for tenure, we see that the owner-occupied households, those that self-responded, did so online 69% of the time compared to households identified as rented that responded online 58% of the time. %% of rented units responded via paper versus 26% of owned units. And finally, when we add in telephone as a mode of response, we see that, as we would expect, households that identified as owned and self-responded did so less frequently via phone. In summary, the 2018 test was the culmination of more than a decade of research and planning. As I began, not only did it show that our systems deployed and integrated successfully, it also reinforced our data that certain populations, especially traditionally hard-to-count populations, may be less prone to respond via the internet, and is helping us to better inform and focus our communications and partnership efforts. And that is it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Open it up to questions from the commission members.
Questions?
Commissioner Moore?
Yeah. Thank you very much. You said that the results were not surprising. So do you feel that the results were, the digital aspect increased or decreased self-response compared to what you would expect without that element?
Okay, interesting question. I think that giving respondents the choice definitely helps. Remember that this will be the first census in which respondents will have the option of actually doing this online. So we do know giving respondents options definitely increases the likelihood of them responding to us. So in conjunction with partnership and other trusted voices in the community, we want to share that message with everyone so that they are comfortable responding in the best way that meets their needs. So we want to ensure them that, everything is safe and secure, whether they do it via paper or on the telephone or on the internet.
Okay, because my understanding is the operational plan for the Census Bureau actually decreases enumeration because they're expecting that self-response rates will be higher as a result of the digital element. But I've not really seen evidence of that. I mean, it may exist, but I haven't seen that.
Yes, and I understand your concern completely. And we are prepared, of course, to hire the number that is needed. So, of course, the hiring for non-response follow-up will be solely based on the responses that were given. So understanding that we have this data, we're still going to take that into consideration. And if needed, we will definitely support, the field the way we need to, even though we have added the additional ways for self-response.
So some of the digital literacy practitioners that I work with have been asking about this Providence test, about actually how people participated online. Do you know which device, what percentage of people use mobile devices, which percentage of people used a desktop, which percentage of people who were completing it online did it at home or traveled to another location like a library or school or someplace like that to complete
I
the
do not
census?
know that, but that is
Okay.
something that I can definitely reach out and see
Yeah,
if
we
can
would
find.
love that kind of information. We just want to know what people do when they get this information. If they're inclined to participate online, what are the ways that they like to do that, and how can we help them prepare for that? That would be great.
course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, do you know why the other tests were canceled? The other field tests?
I do not know why the other field tests were canceled, but I do know that the Providence test was selected initially because of the demographics and the other things that Providence actually encompassed. So I believe that was one of the main reasons why Providence was finally selected as the sole place to conduct the test.
Sorry, I've got two more. There was a report presented by NALEO, I'm not sure how you say that. NALEO, thank you. That looked at Hispanic response rates, and you touched on some of those issues. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was that there had been kiosks set up around Providence, but that actually participation via kiosk was very low. I think it was fewer than 100 people participated. Can you talk about the kiosk setup?
We did have kiosks located throughout Providence County, actually in the postal offices. Okay. So we did have kiosks, and while, like you're saying, they did not fare as well as we thought, it is still an excellent idea, and we do know that across the country, many organizations and local municipalities are actually implementing a system like that to have kiosks for self-response located in areas where, people gather or just public spaces. So although maybe for the test, it did not seem as fruitful maybe as we hoped, we do know that having the kiosks and having different options and different places for people to come and self-response is definitely going to be helpful for 2020.
I think one of the other things that came out in the report was that in their focus groups, people reported that in order to participate online, someplace outside of their home, they needed the support of a trusted person or someone to make that connection, which I thought was interesting. I think I had one. Sorry, give me one more second. Oh, so you said that as a result of this test, the Census Bureau has come up with a way to better focus and inform the communication efforts. Can you talk specifically about what some of those?
Well, just fully having our partnership team totally engaged with us. Unfortunately for the test, we were really focused on systems and procedures. So partnership was not a big part of the test. We were able to, have partnership work with us at different points. But for the 2020, partnership is a main focus. And as you know, Linda Burke is here. She is one of our partnership coordinators for New York State and has been, extremely active. But partnership was not in scope for this test. So we do know that bringing together partnership, of course, working with all the trusted voices in the community, we do know that that arm of partnership will definitely help with awareness and just getting the message out, and also with self-response.
That's great. Thanks so much. I think that's everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Reardon.
So I think you just answered part of my question, that the lead up to the test. How much information was in the community and for how long before the test ran? How much did people know?
Great question. I don't know how much they knew. I was actually involved with the test from the beginning. So from the very first day of hiring, I was in Rhode Island actually until the very last day the test ended. And you know, we did have to do a lot on our own, just informing the community and letting them know we were out there. So like I mentioned, we did not have the partnership connection for the test. That did not mean that we did not have recruiting assistants and other area census office managers and other people involved with the census getting the word out. We did lots of things there in conjunction with mayors and different local municipalities, of course, the governor. So although we did not have the partnership arm, we worked very hard with the community, also with the census employees, to make sure that, you know, we were able to get the word out.
Okay. So it's probably safe to assume that with a more systematic approach to community engagement, that these numbers would go up.
Yes, and I definitely think so. And I can say probably since about 2017, partnership has been involved, you know, starting with the 2020 message. So we're doing lots of things in the community, you know, everywhere now across the country to ensure that, first, we're talking a lot about recruiting. Of course, we're recruiting everywhere. We like to hire people in every single pocket so they can represent the communities that they live in. And then, of course, the next step is just informing the community about, you know, 2020, letting them know the process and just getting them acclimated so that they're not surprised when they start receiving things in the mail.
Right, and the divide between homeowners and renters, is that reflected in the racial divides as well? Is there a component of that?
I can't say that. I would probably think that if you do begin to marry the data and you look at homeowners versus renters and then layer on top the different demographics such as race, income, and things like that, you probably would definitely find some connections between the two.
I live in New York City. I'm a lifelong renter, so I always look at that data and go, I don't understand that. But then when you look at the rest of it, I get it.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Beveridge?
Yeah, I think it might be useful because based upon some of the, I would call it slight confusion in some of the other hearings, if you would go through exactly how the mailing's going to work with respect to Internet First, Internet Choice, et cetera, because I think a lot of people think everybody's just going to get Internet.
Okay, so I don't have that with me, so I am not at liberty. I don't want to give incorrect information, but yes, so all homes will receive a information regarding the census initially to inform them of the different ways that they are able to submit their data. But certain pockets will receive different things, and you're specifically talking about the various stages of the mail out, which I can provide to you all. So that you have a better understanding of the timing of the mail out as well.
Well, the basic point is that everybody could participate with a paper form.
Absolutely.
And I think there's been a certain amount of confusion around that point at other hearings that we've had.
Okay, yes, but you're absolutely right. So every home will receive information about how to respond, and in that it will tell them their different response options, but you're absolutely right. If they receive that and immediately send that back, then they will be all set. So they do not have to respond via phone or the internet. If they are comfortable just completing it via paper, that is an option for them as well.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
This is a follow-up to that question.
Sure.
When you say, and I have other questions, when you say everyone will receive information about how to respond, my organization is telling people in New York City what's going to happen. First, we were told it was going to be a postcard. So is it going to be a postcard, or is it going to be something else?
Okay, so I do not know the specific type of piece of mail they will get. But again, there are different phases, and different phases have different types of mailing. So I need to get the specifics for you
I'm
for
talking about
that.
the initial, that's what I'm.
Yes, and I'm not sure.
That's why I'm foggy. It's foggy, okay. But I'm going to continue to tell people what we were told by the regional director.
Okay.
Which was, is to be a postcard. Now, in addition to that tag number for each location, each address.
Right.
There may be other options on that as well. Okay, so we want to give correct information. All right, going back to your initial report, thank you so much for it. Can you tell us a little bit about whether the email, no, I'm sorry, whether the enumeration allocation is going to be based on the results of the initial response, so that the places like New York with the greatest need will get more enumerated, or will the allocation be per region in a set number?
No, it'll be based upon the community needs. So it
Okay.
will be drilled down very specifically.
All right, so we'll get 1/3 of them in New York, all right?
Yes.
The whole country. It's bad, folks. And the final question, which I just want you to clarify, is in regard to the citizenship question. Could you tell us about the citizenship question? I know you know, that everybody knows it wasn't on that first test. What happened later where they tested that citizenship question? And just speak a little bit about, why it wasn't on that first test.
It was not on the preliminary questionnaire for the 2018 test. We have not after the test, there has not been any more tests. So we will not know until it is either on the questionnaire or not for 2020.
Well, I thought they had designed, had set up not exactly a test, but they were going to run it in the summer in June, is from what I understand, that they're going to do like 400,000 across the country with the citizenship question.
This June?
Yeah.
Yes, June.
I'll have to
This June, because it
follow
was,
up on that.
I think the new director put that, I'm 100% sure that that's what he said.
Okay, I'm gonna have to follow up on that and get you the best information for that as well.
Say, likewise, I heard that there was I'm going to take the word test out, a sampling of that
Okay.
question in Rhode Island with some very dramatic results. If you don't have anything on that, that's okay, but that was also reported out earlier. Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, just a follow-up question to Andy's question about the paper. So one of the options that's been proposed as a way of mitigating the digital security risks that people feel is for community partners to direct everyone to paper. How does that work from a practical standpoint? Is that something that could work? Does it break the system? Is there a limit on the number of paper forms available?
Not at all. It will not break the system. We want people to respond in the way that they feel the most comfortable. So if they are most comfortable doing it on paper, because that is how we have been doing it, we are totally fine with that. So we want to give people the option, and we want to do whatever's comfortable for them.
I have a couple of follow-ups.
Sure.
Everybody ate their Wheaties on the commission today, so
I
you're getting
know.
a lot of questions, which is good.
It's a morning hearing.
It's a morning hearing. The nighttime, we're too tired to ask questions, so you came at the right time. What was the response rate in Providence in 2010, the initial response rate?
That I don't know. I would have to get you that
I think
as
it's
well.
fairly, it would be good just for the record to get it. I think it's fairly higher. So in the initial test this year, it's lower at about 52% right out of the gate, and that's without the citizenship question. And if we overlay, and there's a recent Harvard Kennedy School study that shows that the citizenship question does dramatically affect, especially Hispanic response rates. It would be good, maybe we could do that as a commission or work with the census to get that data and put it on the record to show, because you're already working off of, right, if we're working off 73% and above is usually a pretty good response, we're already at in a test 52% without the citizenship question in one community.
Correct.
In a wholly dramatic new way of looking at the census, and there seems to be confusion, as the commissioners raised, how people are going to get the information. What we heard as a follow-up to you may not have this, previous testimony from other representatives of Census Bureau said about 80% of households will respond online. Is that the assumption that the census is making, that of people who are going to respond, or is that who's getting, right? Like, what is the 80% number, which seems to be the golden number they keep using?
So it's an 80-20 split.
Yeah, you can just the record.
So it's an 80-20. My name is Linda Burke. I'm coordinator for partnership, and I cover the Albany area. Thank you. The outreach will be 80% will get a package that does not have paper,
Okay.
and will be given the option of all forms, but they won't have the paper form. 20% will have the paper form in their initial package. I can't tell you how they make that determination. We do know, as you would know, in upstate New York, there's some areas that will automatically get paper because they are either internet deserts or they're hard to reach, they don't have. So there is an option of an 80-20 that will go out. And it's a package. We don't know. It's not a postcard. We were told a postcard. We were telling people postcard. And then we were corrected. So it's not a postcard. It's a package.
So part of the outreach, as we make recommendations on how the state and other local partners should allocate time and resources, would be, unlike previous census processes where you would get, most households would get a short form paper and you just fill it out and send it back in. There's now an intermediary step potentially giving you more options before you even get to that paper step.
Yes.
Which is now needs to be built into people's awareness, I think, because I don't think people are going to be expecting that. So that's good to know.
Thank you.
I have a couple of more questions. You feel free to stand or sit if you'd like. Largely, most studies have shown that older residents, 65 and older, usually have we overcount them for purposes of the census, whether it's historic undercounting in certain key socioeconomic groups. With the internet being so prevalent as a response this year, have we really looked at that might be changing, where we might not be getting oversampling or over-response from 65 and older because of digital literacy issue? We haven't really talked about that at all, but I think that could be a key area, especially if you take 65 and older and then overlay one of the socioeconomic groups that have been traditionally undercounted. Have you done any analysis about how we sort of prepare for that, especially with older adults in our communities?
I would say that was probably part of partnership, that what we do is we educate and motivate people. So part of the educational process will be to work with seniors. So we definitely identify senior NORC communities where we have a larger retirement community and where people are older, and we do special education and training people. We're also trying to work with senior citizen programs in New York. JASA is one of the big programs we work with, so that we can bring in people to help with the literacy issue or give them the option of choosing paper. But we are focusing on seniors as well in terms of education.
Great. And I have one more question, and maybe this is just a follow-up, and it builds on what some of the other commissioners raised. In Utica, we had testimony which looked at Hispanic residents and populations, because the citizenship question is a key concern of many communities that we've gone to about having a chilling effect. And interestingly enough, what they found in their studies were the Hispanic households like door-to-door personal contact as opposed to paper response rates or online. There's a fear of security issues with electronic piece, but it's a double-edged sword because given the current political environment, they're also worried about someone coming in and knocking on their door from the government. The Commissioner Reardon testified at the commission hearing as well, and there were more than, like, I think 800 census jobs currently open in New York. How do we ensure that those folks that we're hiring are representative of the communities that they're going into? Because I think that will help dramatically as working with the trusted partners, but I think that initial piece is part. How do we work with the Department of Labor and other groups to ensure that they're reflective of the communities being hired? Okay.
So first, I would like to say we are in very close communication. We work with New York State Department of Labor. We actually had a call with them yesterday. So we work with all the workforce centers and all the different career centers across the state. We do job fairs. We go on road shows. We have presence almost in every single workforce center across the entire state. Additionally, our recruiting goals are down to the block level. We have language-specific recruiting goals. We have not cultural-specific recruiting goals, but we work very closely with our partnership team to ensure that we identify any new or emerging populations or immigrant groups and things of that nature. So we're constantly hiring down to the level in which the respondents live in, because we do understand it is very important for someone to see someone on the other side of their door that they know and that they trust. And that also can speak their same language. So it's very important for the census to make sure that we're recruiting in every corner of every community, and also drilling down to every single language to make sure that we do have the proper representation on our staff.
Thank you.
How do you determine that? What data are you using?
So
to
we
determine?
use other census data to determine,
ACS?
we use ACS data to determine the needs for our recruiting.
The ACS data is actually differentiating different African nationalities at this point?
It drills down into certain languages, maybe not down into the different dialects and things like that, but that is, again, where our partnership team comes in. We have partnership specialists that represent almost every ethnicity, every language, every culture, and it is their job to work closely with us to help us and lead us in the right way. So recruiting and partnership work in tandem for sure.
Can you tell us whether that waiver that was requested, we were so pleased about that, on the green card waiver, so you could hire green card holders, whether that has been granted as yet?
It has not been. I believe we're still working on that.
Is it going to be granted? I'm sorry, is it still pending or is it denied?
It's still in discussion.
Hope lives.
Yes.
Okay, to close us out, Director Toby. You just pull a mic, Rich.
Or just jump
Wait.
So thank you. Can you now tell us the rest of the story after the Census Bureau got into the non-response follow-up phase? How did it turn out in Providence? What were the final numbers of participation?
These are our preliminary results on participation. So,
So that includes non-response follow-up?
yes.
Okay.
I misunderstood the numbers then.
I lied. We have more questions.
Okay.
Commissioner Moore.
So based on all that you've learned and all that you see, what do you think we should be concerned about? Is there anything we should be concerned about? Is there anything that gives you pause?
I think that we just really have to get into the community. We have to first talk about jobs. As we mentioned, it is very important for us to attract and recruit people in the neighborhoods in which we live. So I think that that is the first thing that we really need to do. We need to ensure that everyone is applying, of every age and every background. Again, the recruitment process this time is actually online as well. So you just go to 2020census.gov/jobs. You fill out a quick application, a quick assessment. The application is very simple. You don't need a resume or anything like that. You just need to be 18 and have a social security number. That will put you in our applicant pool for the duration of 2020. And then as we have different operations, we will constantly look for people in those pockets. So the first thing is to just let everyone in the community know to apply to our job. And again, this could be for anybody, part-time work, full-time work. Some people were looking for a third job and things like that. So, we just want to really emphasize the importance of census jobs and the importance, even if they can just work a few hours a week. It is very important for us to hire people in every single community. So that's the biggest thing. And then the second thing is just working really closely with partnership and making sure that every trusted voice in the community is talking about the census. So we just want to make sure that all of our organizations are just ensuring that their constituents are aware and are fully supporting the census. So I think with those two things, I think that will be very successful.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Devlin, for
Okay.
testifying today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we call up Commissioner Member Beveridge, I'd like to call up a special guest we have, Assemblyman Robert Rodriguez, who leads the
Yes.
census effort for the New York State Assembly, and he helped create us, so we'd love to have him come up and give us a few words. Thank you. You are our creator, so welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, commission members, for your service on this commission. And we recognize that it's the 8th meeting, so we know you have been diligently applying yourselves to this very important topic of the census. And I think everyone here today agrees with Assembly Speaker Heastie that every New Yorker must be counted in this census this upcoming year. And I think that was very much the impetus around the first investment, I would say, of the $20 million appropriation for census efforts. And I think it's certainly our belief that we're going to probably have to do more in the next upcoming budget just to be online in comparability to larger states like places like California that have appropriated something like $90 million. So that's why I'm careful to mention that we believe it's a down payment because it is such an important priority for us, but an investment that had to begin today rather than waiting till 2020 in order to be effective in 2020. And we all recognize the importance of a complete count, making sure that New York State receives its fair share of resources from the federal government to help support our schools, hospitals, and social service programs. And importantly as well is congressional representation. Most reports have us today losing, as a result of the loss of population, 2 congressional seats. I think beginning next month, we're going to be focusing our efforts in the legislature to inform and help train our colleagues to understand the importance of hard to count. And we know that with our 2010 census data, while some people could argue that it's 10 years old, we think it helps inform some of the ideas about where we should begin to target for 2020 the hard to count regions and areas within each individual Assembly and Senate district. And truly, we must speak to everyone in every part of our districts and in every part of our communities. So we look forward to working with community groups and libraries from Suffolk to Buffalo to make sure that we are getting the word out about the census. We hear all too often in this time of division emanating from Washington that there are efforts to discourage people participating in the census, and we are and have heard already commented about the concern around the citizenship question and how that is potentially depressing participation, especially amongst the Hispanic community. So while we can't do anything about that right now, what we can do is make sure that we inform people about the need and how they can participate in the census. And I think that's particularly important, this being the first time that they can respond online. And I think this is where a significant amount of efforts and energy and I think assumptions are being made by the census team about participation. But we still have not fully informed our communities that they can participate online. We have not seen the large-scale media campaigns out there informing people that this is an option. Certainly haven't seen it in multiple languages, and I know that we are just ramping up efforts. But I think as we get to mid-2019, the general awareness level about this is extremely low, and that I think really helped to push forward our efforts to try and begin the work now and making that appropriation to help the census move it along. So that highlights some of the things that you are digging into in terms of multiple response opportunities and raising awareness, and we look forward to the work of the Commission to help target what we think is going to be a robust strategy for the state of New York to begin and effectuate a higher count. But we also know that this happens through partnerships, this happens through our community groups, this happens through the workforce efforts that happen to hire people in our communities when they do have to enumerate and knock on doors. And all of that must come together in a very short amount of time to get the most effect. So we thank you for your service, and we look forward to the work that comes out of this commission, and hopefully making whole on the rest of the down payment that we know we're going to need in order to make sure that everyone is fully counted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, if you would entertain a couple of questions, Commissioner Simmons, to start.
Thank you so much for birthing this commission. I've already been inundated with questions about what your House is doing regarding setting up the redistricting commission. So all I'm asking, I don't want you to respond now. All I'm asking you is to please get the word out there so people will stop calling me. Let's get the word out there about what's happening.
They can call us.
I don't have any direct link to know what's going on, but you do. Thank you. Please get it out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Moore.
Thank you, Assemblyman. You mentioned that you consider this a down payment on future efforts. I'm just curious how funding in next year's budget cycle actually benefits the organizations that would help with the preparation of this effort.
So when we began the budget process, the ask and our recommendation in our One House resolution was for $40 million. And I think that was comes out of some of the studies, FPI's study on what would be necessary. And I think what we are expecting is that much of this, the initial investment can go towards funding some of the community groups and the libraries that need to make that support, and then an appropriation later on would be able to help support whatever advance payments might be made in order to make sure that our efforts are effective before July.
So the legislature's expectation is that we make an ultimate investment of more than $20 million.
Yes. We think the 40 million is a reasonable estimate to really get to the hard to count number, and I think that's where we would like to be by the next budget.
Well, thank you very much for
Thank you,
coming today.
Commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to bring up
I think I'll do it from
He's
here.
going to do it from here because he's afraid of all the tough questions. If he stays
I have a hard time standing up straight. Anyway, my name is Andy Beveridge. Well, I was going to say I'm a recovering census nerd, but I'm actually not recovering. And I've actually been working, I've been involved in one way or another with every census since 1960, or as I said in the Queen's hearing, but I realized actually that I was also involved in a weird way with the 1940 census because my mentor, Richard Ruggles, had a sample from the 1940 census in his basement. This was long before the confidentiality issues. And so he decided, and I organized a bunch of my fellow graduate students to take the 1940 census, which was on something that some of you may have never heard of here, called punch cards. And we basically put them onto tape. And we actually had to get a machine that they had at that time, which was effectively a mangle or a thing that would press the bent or mildewed cards, some of them, only a small fraction, to get them onto tape. So they actually had, at that time, which would have been probably around late 60s, early 70s, they actually had a machine to press punch cards so you could put them on tape. And so that was the first, that was a special fertility sample. What I wanted to do today, and I'm actually feel a little bit remiss because there was, I'm a member of the Population Association of America, which is an association of numbers nerds. You know, there's not just one or two of us. There's thousands of us pocketed around the country. Another one is actually on the commission. I see he's not here today, Joe Salvo. He's sort of a fellow numbers nerd who runs a demography group in New York. But my focus, I want to talk about what happens once you get the data. Like, what data do we get, and how has it potentially been changed by the citizenship question, which it has been. I actually communicated yesterday with James Whitehorn, who's head of the redistricting office, so people will realize, I guess, what's really at stake. And so the census day is April 2020. That's not, you know, they don't really hold fast to that. They start collecting in Alaska, usually they usually send the census director by dog sled. He goes up to Alaska and collects a few responses, sometime in like February. And but anyway, all of this leads to the first census numbers, which come out by December 31st, 2020. And those numbers are very consequential and they include the enumeration plus an adjustment or information on military abroad and what states they claim to be residents of. And it turns out, for some reason that's not clear, an awful lot of them say they're from North Carolina. So North Carolina gets a little bump. And those data are used predominantly for congressional reapportionment. And as the the Assemblyman said, New York State is now down to lose either 1 or 2 seats in Congress, and worse than that, we're the only state that's projected possibly to lose 2. So because of that, these kinds of efforts are particularly important, I think, because if we don't, if we let it go, we'll be down 2 seats. And of course, everybody says, well, who's going to be victimized? I was involved with the last redistricting. I worked for, among other groups, Esmeralda, and there was a unity coalition of Latino, African American, and Hispanic, and I was kind of their expert. Asian. Yeah, that's right. Asian, yeah, and I was sort of their expert. So we worked last time, but we lost a seat last time. And so then you have a kind of a musical chair scramble, like which person doesn't get a seat, and we play the music, and then someone doesn't get a seat. But it's very, very brutal, actually. And then last time around, the state legislature could not come to an agreement on Congress, and so it was kicked to it was quote unquote an impasse, and so it was kicked to Nate Persily, who then drew the lines. So basically, the first thing we're going to know how New York is doing, and kind of the first, I guess you could call it, assessment of how we're doing, is whether we lose 1 seat or 2 seats. And that's not very good news, right? I mean, even losing 1 seat is bad news. So that's the first set of data, and that'll come out by December 31st, probably. It comes out around Christmas, sometimes before, sometimes after. And then the second release of census data is mandated by law. The law is called Public Law 94-171, and it mandates that all of the data that has been collected by the census, there's a little emendation here, which I'm going to get to, has to come out by April 1st, 2021. Now, those data traditionally are basically race Hispanic data, both for those who are over 18 and those who for total population. As you may know, total population is the way in which districts are drawn, and then I think they had the other data to deal with some issues around the Voting Rights Act. There's only really, one of the things about the census, you have to realize that I think one of the most important things that people should tell everybody is, and we'll talk about the citizenship question in a minute, that except for the citizenship question, the census data are really, really unimportant. I mean, like it's not your birth date, it's not your medical records, it's not your credit history, all the kinds of stuff you probably easily give up to Google and your when you buy Amazon and when you buy anything. It's just like like where you live, who lives there, what's their age, what's their racial composition, and what's their Hispanic, if they're Hispanic or not. And there's a little story there because the census, the other thing they did was they threw into the waste can about 8 years of analysis to change how they were going to ask race and Hispanic status. And I know the Census Bureau people can't talk about this out loud unless they're deposed, which happened in the citizenship case, but in truth, they were very much against what happened there. So it's about 7 questions, though they say it's 10 questions. One of the big problems they have is that people forget about their young kids, and I think we did have some testimony on that, but it's very well known that the number of young people under 4 are being undercounted. And so this data come out, and then the redistricting scramble begins. But this year, and I talked to James Whitehorn yesterday, they're also going to release the citizenship data by April 1st, 2021. So by April 1st, and that'll probably be a separate data set, because he does that now with the American Community Survey. He releases it, they release it down to the block group, and so they'll probably do it the same thing. So while the census data has massive, iterations, like Tiger Woods could, I think, check 5 races. And then, so they have like you can check up to 5 or 6 races, and whether you're Hispanic or not. So there's actually 126 permutations. For the citizenship data, they have, since for about a decade, they've been releasing it with about 10 iterations, 10 different categories. And I think Whitehorn wants to hold to that for the new citizenship data. So by April 1st, 2021, we're going to have enough data to redraw the Assembly, redraw Congress, and we're going to know how many seats we have in Congress, redraw the state Senate, which has been a contentious issue for probably for 4 decades, and so that's going to happen. So then, what has been the impact? And Jim mentioned it, of putting the citizenship question on the census. And I think that that's the real issue for New York, because New York, as you all know, has a lot of immigrants. And there was this was all presented at the PAA conference. There was a study done internally to the Bureau where they took people who were offered both the 2010 ACS and the 2010 census. Obviously, everybody's offered the 2010 census, and they tried to figure out who answered the census, who would not answer the ACS, and they since they're the census, they can get data from other sources, and it's like the data checks in. This is Title 13. The data checks in, but it can't check out. In other words, if they get data from the IRS, or they get data from DHS, or they get data from ICE. Well, they wouldn't get it from ICE, from DHS. They don't share it. It comes inside. So what they did, which I thought was very clever, was they took anybody who reported that they were citizens, but they confirmed that with administrative records. So if everyone in the household was clearly a citizen, they treated the citizenship question as not particularly sensitive. However, if they couldn't confirm everyone in the household was a citizen, or they found that one or more people in the household were not citizens, then they treated that question as sensitive, and they also did a bunch of other things. They used the most sophisticated statistical models known to man. And they did a bunch of other things and to figure out what impact the citizenship question had in 2010. And the answer is big. It would be big based on the ACS estimate. Their estimate was that between 7 and 9% of the households would not answer any of the ACS if the citizenship question was there. Those people, and if they were sensitive. And then they also did another analysis, which actually isn't quite as dramatic, that whether or not they'd skip the question. And there's other evidence, by the way, from back in the day, as it were, that like let's say you're a non-citizen or you have a non-citizen in the family, and you get a form. What would be the logical strategy if you were suspicious of the government? Now, I mean, I realize in some contexts you might not be suspicious, but let's just pretend that you might be suspicious because, let's say the president says all sorts of trash about immigrants. So the logical thing to do is to say you're a citizen. And there's actually a fair amount of evidence that a fairly large group of people who are non-citizens say they're citizens. It's and if you read through the famous Ross memo, which goes on and on and on, he starts hinting around that he wants to basically classify people who have more or less lied. This hasn't been really pushed yet in the redistricting context, but it would have a huge effect in voting rights, because if you could argue that, say, 25% of the Latino population, citizen population given district were actually lying, it would drop you under 50%. for that group in that area. And so you would then be in a situation where you would have to, you would lose, basically. So I think that's sort of hinted at in the infamous Ross memo, but wasn't really there. So anyway, their expectation, and this would be based upon the context of 2010, the expectation would be that they would lose 7 to 9% of the non-citizen households that are sensitive, and that would translate in about 2.2% of the total population, which is about 6.85 million, which everybody points out is larger than Indiana. So that's what we're up against, but obviously that's not distributed randomly across the United States. This is distributed where non-citizens live. And also, the estimate is based not upon the current toxic environment, but is based upon when Obama was president. So I think both of these things really mitigate against a real difficulty in reaching areas where there's large numbers of immigrants, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. I mean, I realize there are a lot of Hispanic immigrants, but in New York, there's a lot of other immigrants that are not Hispanic. So what that means, oh, by the way, just FYI, guess which congressional district has the highest fraction of non-citizens? It's District 14, where AOC represents.
Right,
So she might be one of the people who is going to face the musical chairs if they lose 2 seats. And so I think that this really makes it all the more important for New York to invest heavily this year. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons that drove California's investment, because it's very obvious, and there was also evidence from the ACS reports from, I think from when the 18 was in the field, that people were much more suspicious about answering the census. And you can't tell them that Title 13 is in place and they can't share the data. I mean, first off, the Census Bureau during the World War II, Title 13 wasn't in place at that time. They put it out, a similar thing was dropped. But if you take they rounded up the Japanese using census data in 1942. So that's there. That's history. So if you're an immigrant, what are you going to think? Also, the immigrants who have had experience with being interviewed by the government, it didn't go too well, and it's one of the reasons that DACA doesn't require parents to sign anything, because they don't want to basically put their parents at risk. And then, the other point that has to be made is that in terms of the citizenship question case in California, they found evidence, I think it was an email between 2 DOJ officials who were saying, and they were saying, well, we should talk about confidentiality, that our data are really confidential. And the DOJ, the person responded and they said, well, it might not be good to rely too much on that because we might want to revisit that.
Exactly.
So, I mean, so this is the environment we're in. We're in kind of, it's tabula rasa. It hasn't been like this before, despite Ross's claim and despite what some of the Supreme Court people said, justices said. It is not true that the citizenship question has really been asked. It's not like we're going back to past practice. That's just not really true. And so, in fact, I was on an amicus written, who the person really doing it was Margot Anderson, who's like the leading historian of the census, and we politely called Ross a liar. But, I don't know what this means for New York. I don't know, but we have to do I guess I feel like we have to do something. And, if you look at it, the census has tested measures to go try to get the younger children in. There's the immigrant communities, or communities where there's a lot of immigrants. There's faith-based groups. Also, some of them serve immigrant communities. Libraries and the like. I mean, I think, like in Queens, I think at the Queens Public Library, it's got just massive amounts of immigrants come in there every day. And then other state and local facilities. And I realize that the feds, despite what the feds have cut back on outreach, they've cut back on all of these things. And I mean, it seems to me it leaves New York in kind of a bad spot. We have to figure out kind of what to do. We have to do as much as we can. I mean, another way to look at it is, do we want the last congressional seat that isn't allocated be or California's? I mean, and to say so, we would rather it be California's. I mean, nothing. I have nothing against California, but the point is that that's what happens with the congressional allocation. It gets, it'll be at the level. It could be at the level as low as like 15, 20,000 population. Means one state gets a congressperson, another state doesn't. So, with all of that, and I'm not saying what to do with this or how to do it, but I think we got to do a lot more than we're planning at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner. For the record, Commissioner Beveridge is not suggesting that he's going to be storing the census responses in his basement this year. I don't know if that was a threat or something, but we're going to take it as just historical
well, that's the
fact.
1940 data. That was then.
2 points before we turn over to public comments. Thank you. That's really important. The foreign-born population is particularly of interest in how do we reach those communities. I think California and New York, respectively, are 1 and 2 in the nation, where more than 20% of our entire our residents are foreign-born, right? So that's a real meaningful impact. So when you're talking about 2%, it's not spread evenly, like you said. It's concentrated in certain states.
Also Texas.
Texas.
We want to bring them up.
We don't know about that state. The second piece, and you mentioned, is, and we've heard this a lot from testimony, confidentiality. We've struggled with this as a commission about what to make a recommendation on. The more folks, especially government partners, say your information is secure, don't worry, the less people actually believe that your information is secure, and they actually think the opposite. So how to balance those things are critically important, but we appreciate it. I'm not going to subject you to the questioning, Commissioner, today, but we'd like to start our public comments. We'll get everybody in. So we'll begin that now. First, I'd like to call up Kathy Stempel from the Byrne Public Library. Don't be shy, Kathy. Okay. Kazi Kabir. Everybody's either in the restroom or getting coffee. Laura Berman. Or Bierman, sorry. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Laura Ladd Bierman, Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of New York State. The League is a nonpartisan political organization working to promote civic responsibility through informed and active participation of citizens in government. We have 48 local leagues throughout the state registering and educating voters on local and state issues. As an outgrowth of the women's suffrage movement 100 years ago, the League has provided communities with a venue for educational programs on current issues. Advocacy has also been an important facet of League activity since our founding. On behalf of the League, I want to thank this commission for the opportunity to speak about the 2020 census and how the League can assist in ensuring a complete count in New York State. In less than 1 year, on April 1st, 2020, the census will be in full swing. Communities across the country will begin reporting to the U.S. Census and be counted. This process of counting will ensure that the political power, health, and safety of every community is maintained or enhanced in the upcoming decade. In the next year, though, there's much preparation that needs to be done by community groups who represent minorities, immigrants, children, and others to ensure that everyone is counted. It is reported that the 2010 census undercounted as many as 1 million children ages 5 and under. USA Today noted that no count of more than 325 million people can be perfect or exact, but by comparing the 2010 census with separately gathered statistics on births, deaths, and immigration, researchers determined the enormous scope of the problem: 1 million children short. Enumerators miss some residences altogether, and some places are simply harder to count, often for reasons of poverty or geography. About 4.5 million children under age 5 live in poverty in areas that are difficult to capture, such as remote areas of Alaska or the Appalachian, dense blocks of apartment buildings in large cities, and regions with culture of distrust of the government. The 2020 census raises additional challenges to get the count of children correct. The 2020 census will also be the first time the Census Bureau will ask people to fill out the census online. There are many challenges listed in my written testimony for that. The League would like to collaborate with the Complete Count Commission to help ensure a full counting of all inhabitants in the country. It is important for so many reasons. The League has a statewide presence and is a great resource for the Commission to reach all the communities in New York. We encourage the Commission to provide materials and information that can be shared by the leagues in the communities to educate the public on the importance of the census. We also hope that we can work together to develop ways to assist in reaching the often underrepresented neighborhoods and populations. A good census is the first step to making sure that everyone has good roads, schools, and representation now and in the future. Thank you
very much. We would love to partner with you, so
Great.
we'll make sure that we get a lot of your information up on our website too.
That's
as well.
great. We would love to do education in all the different communities. We also have Jeff Baylor coming and speaking at our state convention in June, which we'll have small group discussions to see how we can do more.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Christine Primomo. Casey Conlon. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Casey Conlon. I'm the Library Sustainability Coordinator at the Mid-Hudson Library System, where we support our 66 member libraries in Columbia, Greene, Dutchess, Ulster, and Putnam counties in identifying and meeting the needs of their communities. Some people call public libraries the Swiss Army knives of their communities, and I think that's a really good description to keep in mind, as the census, something we haven't had to deal with as communities in 10 years, approaches with new twists that we might have to deal with. This online component is going to bring a lot of efficiency. It's going to help us count a lot of people, but it's also going to leave some people out. If we want to make sure everybody has access to their democratic right to be counted and represented in the government, and we want to have good data and good picture of our population so that we can allocate funds and we can make strategic plans, we're going to need to count everyone. We're not just the people who know that they should be part of the census already, and not just the people who have access to the internet. We're going to have to count everybody. So we're going to need libraries. So we're really lucky that we have 750 public libraries all around the state who are experienced with digital training and who have the trust of their communities and who actually are able to build partnerships and reach out further into the community than they can just on their own. So libraries provide internet access to the nearly 20% of New Yorkers who lack broadband at home. And in Mid-Hudson last year, we had over 500,000 people access the internet through our public library terminals. Every day, library staff help people do everything from print out pictures of their grandkids on Facebook to apply for jobs online. Public library staff are experts in helping people navigate digital resources and protecting patron information. And when the census is released next year, they'll be trained in best practices for helping people to access the census and to complete it, which means that people who don't have or can't even get broadband access are going to have the ability to be counted at their library. And so we know from tests, as we heard before, and pilots run by the census, that filling out the census is not high on anybody's to-do list. And we know that educating people about the census is important, and how it affects them makes them want to complete the census. So libraries are trusted educators, open to everyone in their community, and 100% of the hard-to-count populations live within 1 mile of their public library. So each time someone visits the library, it's an opportunity for us to let them know that their participation in the census affects funding for WIC, HEAP, local schools, Medicaid, community development grants, and a lot of other things. But we can't do it alone. So we're building partnerships and complete count committees with local governments, with community groups, with schools, and anyone will help us get the word out. And these partnerships and this coordination is going to help us reach further into the community and reach deeper into the community with trust and with resources. So everyone deserves to be counted in the 2020 census, and we all stand to lose a lot of aid at the state and local level if we don't count everybody. As the Swiss Army knives of our communities, we're going to step up and we're going to make sure we count as many people as we can. But state aid for libraries is not currently funded at the statutory level, and more funding is needed to help us expand our abilities and our reach into the communities.
Thank you very much. Next up, Eric Trahan.
Good morning. My name's Eric Trahan. I'm the Executive Director of the Mohawk Valley Library System, and I'm here to talk to you not so much about problems, but much like Casey just did, to talk about the opportunity that we have for libraries to partner with you in collecting census information and getting a complete count. I think there are 3 ways that the libraries can do that. One is that we know that libraries are a trusted community space. There was a Pew Research study in 2016 that said 90% of U.S. adults view their public library as a trusted space. And that will be an important part of both getting information out to the community on the census and in having people fill out the census forms. Again, as Casey said, libraries are where people go to access web resources. If you don't have it at home, where can you do it? You can do it at your local public library. Households that earn less than 50% annually indicate that their local public library is their primary point for internet access. So libraries are where people go to access web resources. And finally, as Casey said, libraries are where the hard-to-count population is. There are more than 1,000 public library locations in New York State. Casey gave the number of 756 libraries. That's entities, locations. There's more than 1,000, and almost everybody lives near a public library. They trust their public library, and they are using their public library as a way to access information and a way to do things like file their taxes and apply for jobs and do other things that you have to do online these days. So I want to emphasize the opportunity that we have for including libraries in your complete count information. There's a great article in today's Daily Gazette, if you look at that, and it's under the headline, "Libraries are a great investment." And libraries are a great investment in many ways, both for our local communities. That article happened to be about the building of a new branch in Schenectady, but there will be a great investment also for complete count efforts. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I hope you include libraries in your complete count activities.
Thank you very much. The commission would also like to note for your record your wonderful tie.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The library tie.
You take it, every detail counts. I'd like to call up next Alex Kudish. Well, never mind, Alex. Next, Erica Friedenberger. Freudenberger.
Thanks for the opportunity to discuss the role of public libraries in the upcoming 2020 census. I'm Erica Freudenberger, the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for the Southern Adirondack Library System, one of 23 public library systems in New York. With me today is Sarah Dallas, our Executive Director and member of the Library Complete Count Committee. We serve 34 mostly small rural member libraries in Hamilton, Saratoga, Warren, and Washington counties. Our smallest library in Racket Lake serves 114 people, while the largest, the Crandall Public Library in Glens Falls, serves 57,329 residents. Historically, people in poverty, those in transient living situations, people of color, and immigrants are undercounted in census efforts. The move to a digital census will further exacerbate the challenge of getting an accurate count, especially in rural, hard-to-count areas, without reliable broadband, and where much of the population have little to no access to home internet or mobile phone service. In New York, 25% of households earning less than $50,000 annually rely on the local public library as a primary point of internet access. The 2020 census will have an immense impact on the underfunded and unrepresented communities we serve, and we are concerned that digital equity issues will result in an incomplete count, costing us resources and representation. Fortunately, as you've heard before, public libraries are located within 5 miles of 99% of the hard-to-count census tracts identified with the lowest response rates in 2010, and 73% of the time are located within 1 mile. Our member libraries are planning on providing broadband access points and trusted assistance to those with digital and literacy challenges to ensure that everyone is counted. We're already supporting the census, hosting recruitment for potential workers at member libraries and collaborating with Amy Brombus at the New York Regional Census Center. While we are delighted to play this role as a critical partner with the government, public libraries need funding to invest in infrastructure, technology, cybersecurity, and staffing. An estimated additional 150,000 to 170,000 library staff hours will be needed to do our part in ensuring a fair, accurate, and inclusive report. We appreciate the $20 million designated for census efforts in New York and want to ensure that public libraries will receive funding to support our role in obtaining an equitable count. This investment in public libraries will yield robust returns in the coming decade, ensuring that every person counts. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
150 staff hours that you mentioned?
Yeah.
Is that per library?
150,000. So that's 150,000 to 170,000. That's estimated statewide, what we're going to need to do the work.
Thank you.
And I have written testimony?
Yep, that gets submitted right there. Thank you. Michael Neppel? He's walking. Well, that is a grand entrance. You get best entrance for any census hearing.
Thanks. I considered playing music on my phone, but I couldn't settle on a tune. Thank you to the Commission for holding this hearing today in Albany and for allowing me to testify. My name is Mike Neppel. I'm here from the New York Library Association. You've heard from many of my colleagues already, not only today, but in previous hearings. So I just want to highlight a few items. Libraries are going to do this work. If you give us money, if you don't give us money, if you don't provide resources or training, pardon me, we're going to end up doing this work anyway, because we always do. We did this work when we were enrolling people for healthcare. We do this work every year when we're helping people prepare their taxes. We would love to have the resources to be able to do this effectively. There's a difference between just showing up and showing up with intent. So I guess what I would like to deliver to the Commission today in this message is, I hope you're showing up with intent. This is one of the most important things government does, and it happens once every 10 years. And if we get it wrong, communities lose for a generation. Most communities, the communities that I grew up in, this is some of the only assistance that they get. This is their best opportunity to advantage themselves of the resources that they need. Everyone counts, and I think that's an important message for government to deliver now more than ever. Thanks.
Thank you. One quick thing. We heard in a number of our hearings that libraries were sort of an essential role for signing up folks under the Affordable Care Act. Put aside the resource question, which has been established, what are some of the things that you all had to do that were successful in enrolling folks? What were the strategies in place? Because I think many of those communities will also be some of our hard-to-count communities. So how do we sort of cross-pollinate some of those successful strategies that you've done under the ACA?
You know, it's interesting. I work for the statewide association, so I don't actually work in a library, but I hear, obviously, from many people that do, and I wish that I could give you some sort of definitive list or pro forma path that we followed to help people, but it didn't quite work like that for us. We help people where they are with what they need at that moment. And our ability to do that is entirely dependent upon the resources that we are provided. You know, we've been shortchanged in the state budget, both with operating funds and capital funds, for a decade now. We're going to do our best, but I want us to be able to do even better because we're going to be representing New York State and carrying this message forward, the important message that everyone counts and everyone deserves to be counted.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanp you.
Got some answers in the audience.
I'm sorry, if I can answer your question about
Okay,
how
great.
libraries dealt with the
Thank
ACA
you.
navigation, at least small public, rural libraries. What we did is we partnered with local organizations that were providing the services and had them come to our libraries because especially in rural communities, transportation is an issue, and so people couldn't get to where they were. so that by partnering with organizations, having them come into our spaces where they were trusted, also in rural libraries, we have the advantage sometimes of being the only game in town.
Right.
You know, like everybody's going to go there anyway. And so that's how we did it. It's through strong partnerships. And we look forward to working with the Census to make that happen again.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Scott Jarzambek.
I would like to thank the members of the New York State Complete Count Commission for the opportunity to speak to you today. I am here as the director of this capital city's public library district, as well as Albany and Rensselaer County's Central Reference Library. In 2018, Albany Public Library provided 215,000 computer and Wi-Fi sessions to the public. We estimated we have anywhere between 10,000 to 20,000 unique users of our internet and network. As I left this morning, there was a line of people in the front entrance of our Washington Avenue branch. The majority of those individuals were waiting to get on a public computer. We have moved to an online age where taxes, job applications, and even communication with teachers have moved to online portals. While this is a natural progression, creating efficiencies and reducing waste, it is also a stark reminder of the digital divide that we see in many of our communities. In Albany, we find many of our fellow citizens left on the wrong side of this divide. It is not just a lack of connectivity, there is also an absence of the necessary skills to use this technology, or what we call in the field, the digital literacy. Albany libraries will naturally become the primary place for individuals in the community to come fill out the census. We are trusted institutions, centered in the heart of many neighborhoods, and a number of those neighborhoods are in the zip codes that are identified as at-risk tracts. Our libraries have the hardware and infrastructure, but also the human resources to help guide in the process. My concern as the executive director of this capital city's library is that of organizational capacity. Libraries have naturally become the Swiss Army knife, and Casey and I did not coordinate that, the Swiss Army knife of municipalities, almost always rising to the challenge of community needs. As resources are reallocated in cities, towns, and county governments, libraries often find a way to provide a prior need. We are often, as the organizations who reside on the Main Street, the ones who recognize new challenges and opportunities. We are the canary in the coal mine. That is why you will see and hear from so many of us over this process. It is essential that APL and other libraries across the state are provided with the support that we will need as we play a crucial part of this fundamental process. In closing, the library is the primary community resource for connecting people to the internet. We realize that with the changes being made to the 2020 census, we will see an increase in people visiting our libraries to use our public computers and Wi-Fi, and for assistance in completing their census questionnaires. We plan on working with the City of Albany and our multiple partners, community partners, to make sure we are up to the task of ensuring that Albany counts and that its residents are provided with their fair share of support for services that benefit our entire community.
Thank you very much. Next, Dee Dee Hill. Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. So I'm Dee Dee Hill, and I'm Policy Director for the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy. Since 1872, the Schuyler Center has been advancing policy to strengthen New York families and to improve child well-being. I have three main messages that I want to convey today. So first, young children are among the groups at highest risk of being undercounted, as has already been referenced today. The reasons for the undercount of young children are different than for other hard-to-count groups, and that is really critical to understand because in order to avert a young child undercount, we need to take a targeted, deliberate approach to the young child undercount. And of course, the stakes of an undercount for New York children and families really couldn't be higher. As we've discussed, there are so many federal funds that are essential to services that New York families and children rely upon that are at stake. It would also distort critical data that we rely upon to inform sound policymaking. So one thing I want to underscore, as I mentioned, the reasons for the young child undercount are distinct. And I think one fact that underscores this is that 4 out of 5 times in the 2010 census that young children were missed, 4 out of 5 times, the household had actually filled out the census form. They had just omitted their young children from the census form. So if all of New York State's get out the count efforts are focused on hard to count populations, based on past failures to participate at all, we're going to really be missing the boat on the young child undercount. So I'm going to make just a couple of recommendations. The first is just recognizing that this is an issue and that we need a deliberate, targeted strategy to address the young child undercount. Second is I would urge New York State to work with some of the national experts who are focusing on the young child undercount. I mentioned a few in my written testimony. There are focus groups and other studies underway right now about what is the best messaging to reach families with young children and to get them to count their youngest. Finally, New York State should make an urgent push to ensure that there are complete count commissions in every county, every city, particularly the most populous, and that on those complete count commissions, we have somebody who is connected with families with young children and the CBOs that serve them, and who is particularly focused on the young child undercount. Thank you, and we look forward to partnering with you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Thank you so much for your testimony. In the past, we've heard from the mayor who has told us that there's a large number of Hispanic children that will not count in New York State. Could you give us the characteristics of the children that are estimated to be not counted, rural, black, or whatever?
So I mean, there are a few things, and some of this is still, but there's some things that everybody agrees upon. So first, children of color, young children of color, are among the largest group who are undercounted.
I want you to break that down.
Okay.
Asian, black, Native American, besides Latino.
Yeah. So that part I don't know, but I can get back to you. But another characteristic that increases the likelihood of an undercount of young children are children who live in linguistically isolated households. So that's going to address many immigrant communities. Also, grandparent-headed households. And finally, group living situations, and where we find that a lot is families who are doubled up, which of course is an issue in New York City and all over the state. So that even heightens the likelihood of an undercount.
Is there a reason, though, for why parents leave their children off? I mean, in some testimony we heard it's an element of fear from some of our marginalized communities. Some of this seems like there's a lack of awareness potentially. So is there something that sticks out in what you found that we really need to focus on as a state to get the count up for the children?
So here I am going to defer to the national experts who are, and so we know there are a number of reasons, and some are in large households. There traditionally haven't been enough. There have been a limited number. I don't know how many. 12 or 8, right? And so they just go in numerical order and drop them off. So that's one reason. I think another reason in complex families where children are living, perhaps, like I said, with grandparents, or they're shared custody, living with an aunt, there's a lot of confusion as to who is going to count that child, which household, and so they just often get left off altogether. So that's something we need to be educating about. Unfortunately, there are a number of different reasons, but like I said, right now they're testing messaging, and we're going to be getting those results. We're thinking around September, and also they're going to be rolling out, instructions, and materials that we can all use to try to reach out to these
Does the
families.
messaging testing include this sort of new step? Like you're going to be getting a pre-form on some level? Like I think people are going to be, so you have a situation where you have a household that's doubled up, or the head of household is our grandparents, or it's a foster community. So you're getting this now pre-step.
Right.
Now, they're not going to be the 12 list, which is sort of interesting. The youngest children always sort of in everything in life seem to be the forgotten children. I'm the oldest, so I prefer the younger. But right, my younger sister, she's been lost. But is there messaging beyond with that sort of new process as well? Because I think that could complicate the response rate as well.
I will have to get back to you on that. I know that the focus groups they're going to be launched this summer, and the folks who are running this, Bill O'Hare is one of them, they are very much aware of all the developments. So I imagine that they're going to do the best they can, but I just don't know.
We'll share our testimony with you as well, whatever we get in. So if that helps inform the focus groups, I think that would be enormously instructive for both sides. So thank you.
Okay, great.
Do you have a question, Amy?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people should realize is that this has been a growing problem. In other words, unlike some of these other things which actually declined, like the basically miss rate had declined between 90 and 2000 and further in 2010. Among the small children, it's gone up, and when you talk about messaging, they actually have on the questionnaire now, any babies? They put a special question on to kind of go back and say, well, are you sure you got all the kids? Even with that, it's going up. And, I know Bill fairly well, and, I don't know if he has an answer either, but I mean, it's a serious problem. And since they would go into the see, this is a real problem because with Luca, you're going to get the households. But if you miss people, you're going to have a lower population than you should have. And so, that would potentially affect congressional reapportionment.
Well, you're seeing that in the Providence example, right? Forget the low response rate, then you only have 55% or so of the household be counted in the response anyhow.
Well, that's the initial response, I think. I'm not sure. Was that the initial response? Yeah, I think the overall was 50-something last time, initial response. Okay. They mess around with what they use. The question about what was the total response and what was allocated, which I don't know if that's on the PL94 data. The PL94 data has come out for prototype.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'd like to call up Greta Byram. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for convening this conversation today. I'm here in my capacity as the co-director of the New Schools Digital Equity Laboratory, which is a nonpartisan university center dedicated to advancing digital equity through applied research, convening power, and leadership development. I've been working in the field of digital equity, access, and adoption for a decade. And based on my experience in the field, I believe that the digital transition of the census is understudied and requires attention and investment to achieve a level of success sufficient for governance. So to remind everybody here, and you mentioned, Commissioner Malatras, the rollout of healthcare.gov, that was the last time we saw a really large-scale digital transition of a critical process. And it didn't go well. So let's not do that again. And some of the problems that happened were because the systems were untested when the process actually rolled out. And some of the problems happened around access challenges and literacy challenges, digital literacy challenges. So I wanted to also mention the Assemblyman who testified earlier mentioned that there's an online option. In fact, 80% of households will be invited to participate digitally first, and only 20% will receive a paper survey first. So that actually sounds like paper surveys are more of the option, whereas digital is more of the expected participation format. And given that, according to the most recent Pew statistics, 35% of U.S. adults do not have internet at home, this is really alarming. And we know, as many of the librarians who have testified today, that libraries will likely pick up this slack. So I just wanted to mention some of the things we don't know yet about the digital rollout that are troubling. We don't know how or even if some of the new systems will work, since there wasn't time to end-to-end test some of them, and they weren't complete before the first end-to-end test. We don't know how the user interface will work, how friendly it will be, and this gets at the question of counting young children, because according to anecdotal evidence, people had to scroll through a number of screens to count young children, and that can definitely be a deterrent. We don't know if there will be an option for mobile digital response or how it will work, if there is. Have you ever tried to type a URL into your phone browser, especially from a piece of paper? We don't know how to message to people about the very real possibility of things like imposter census websites, which is not protected by an HTTPS portal. So these are just a few of the issues we've asked the Census Bureau, and we have not received any responses. So libraries are going to have to step up and face this challenge. And we want to urge the Commission to be cognizant of the capacity and resources required for this digital transition, and to please look to the recommendations we will release next week, which include a number of tools and strategies and specific recommendations for implementation preparedness, which is quite different from messaging and outreach.
Great, thank you.
Where can we get that? What's your website?
digitalequitylab.org.
Thank you.
Fred and I are doing a webinar this afternoon, which you're also welcome to join, where we'll be speaking about some of those tools specifically.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, Gloria Roberts. I was going to sing the Van Morrison song for her. Elaine Frazier. I don't know an Elaine song. Last but not least, Mark. What? Elaine? That's okay. Yeah, why don't you just pull a chair and we'll give her a mic.
Oh, sorry, Rob.
I'll to take my standing exercises. Okay. If I pass out, let's sue the dormitory authority. Good afternoon.
We don't have that type of insurance here, so just wait until after you go on the city street, and then that's fine.
Trust me, I know where the money is. My name is Elaine Frazier. Welcome to Albany, those of you who are new here. I am chair of the Capital Area Urban League, and I am relieved to see you, to understand that there are people who understand the magnitude of the seriousness of this issue. I was advised today to not be political, but I can't help it, so this is y'all's fault. When we considered the seriousness of the technologically based census, we became concerned about several things. By the way, to say that the libraries are the Swiss Army knife, they're the Swiss Army knife, they're the nuclear weapons, they are the green food, we would not have a public ally in the empowerment work of the Urban League, were it not for particularly the Albany Public Library. So I promise you, we have a new named One Person, One Vote coalition here. One of its staples is Scott Jerzombic and the Albany Public Library. I understand the role and critical nature of the census as one related to services and money. I'm going to talk to you very briefly about the critical role of the census in representation. It is why it exists in public policy, where we do not have a credible process. We have garbage in and garbage out. That garbage out comes in the forms of underfunded, under-resourced municipalities. It sets the stage for the vitriolic division that is occurring and is manipulated here. And I do mean here, as in where you sit. And we have a deep and dark experience with representation here. But we've been winning and we've been fighting. And the significance of the census to the undercounted populations is our ability to convey meaning and significance in a census process that is well understood in the public sector, in the electoral community, but I would probably speculate is not really believed in the community where the census is undercounted. I would suggest to confront one of the problems, which is the undercounted children. It's a particular concern of ours because it is our children that generate the most horrific. We need to start a Children First campaign. So the first thing that goes on the census is, have you counted your children today? It's a question that we should lead with, that we should beg the elected officials who would benefit from it and the cities who get the money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, Mark Wilson.
Am I the end? Am I
You
the last
are
one?
the last one.
Then you're in the home stretch. And I want to thank the commission and its members for the time that it took to travel the state and collect all this information and to allow public hearings and public comments like this. As noted, my name is Mark Wilson. I am president of the Board of Trustees of the Mid-Hudson Library System based in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mid-Hudson is a cooperative library system chartered by the New York State Board of Regents, part of the State Education Department, and it's dedicated to strengthening local library service while saving local tax dollars. Mid-Hudson is celebrating its 60th year of existence, and it works closely with its 66 member libraries to ensure the public's right to free access, economical resource sharing, professional library services. We are just one of 23 systems throughout New York State. I think that's been mentioned before, and you've heard from representatives from other systems as well. Our system comprises a 5-county area that is equivalent in the size to both Rhode Island, the states of Rhode Island and Delaware combined, so it's a pretty big area. Considering many of the challenges to successfully obtain a complete count in the 2020 census, the State Education Department knows that libraries will play a critical role in local and statewide efforts. Some of the key points I was going to mention have already been spoken on, so I'm going to skip that. Just a couple of items. Libraries, again, provide internet access to a large, alarming percentage of people, as noted, who lack broadband service at home. They may have a computer, but they don't have access to the internet. And Columbia and Greene counties, where I am, are traditionally known as some of the worst. It is the worst within the state of New York. So libraries are here to step in and fill the breach for that. Libraries are leading the charge on local complete count initiatives already, and in many parts of the state are the ideal lead fiscal agents for community-wide efforts. Libraries are committed to digital security and online privacy and can help community members understand how the online census works, what risks are inherent in the process, and how the library has helped to mitigate those risks. In order to provide the safest and most secure online experience, many libraries will require funding to put the best practices into place. Thanks to the existing IT capacity of libraries and library systems, libraries can make these technology upgrades quickly. But with training and with some influx of funding to help do that. Libraries have been a civic institution for millennia, and many people within New York State are very much familiar with their local libraries. What they're not aware of are what the systems do behind these libraries to lift them up, to make them economically work. For every dollar that is put into a library system's budget, the community receives back $7 worth of services. So we have economies of scale that can really improve the efforts done for this particular project. The decennial census, I believe, was created to show what it means in the phrase, we the people. And libraries are here, willing, able, and ready to help make every person count. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for raising the library infrastructure issue. It's been mentioned but not focused on. I'm going to put you on the spot. How much would it take to improve the firewalls of the library systems? The firewalls.
Firewalls.
Of the library system, so when people fill out the census, their information won't get snatched up.
Correct. Casey, I don't know if you have anything to mention on that, right?
Greta is the person.
This will be a multiple response. Please, go ahead.
That's why we're right, we have the task force, and that's why we're working with people who know this stuff better.
you.
We're librarians. We know where to find the information, not all the info. So we got Greta, right?
Greta, all right, Greta.
I'm gonna struggle to think of a dollar amount.
What's an estimate?
Yeah.
So actually, I can.
Can you?
Yeah. So last week I used a draft version of the Digital Equity Laboratory's recommendations. We had a conversation with my IT department. What would it look like to put some of these best practices in place? Truth is, libraries are already implementing a lot of these best practices, which is why it makes sense, why it could make sense to invest in libraries rather than building the infrastructure in other community-based organizations. But we did realize that there were some pitfalls still. There were still some vulnerabilities. So we looked and we said, for the way that our system works, we could, for $1,000, get a Chromebox setup, which is an Android basically setup. We realized we couldn't use a Chromebook because we needed a large screen, because a small Chromebook screen is hard for visibility issues. So that's why we came up with the Chromebox solution with a screen, peripherals, so that people can use it easily. Distributed across our 42 libraries, that's $1,000 a library. So that's just for the equipment, $42,000, plus then the time it takes to kind of implement the strategy. And then the other important piece is the training, so that making sure that the social part of this is addressed, so that when people come in, they have questions, they have concerns. I believe, Esmeralda, your folks have spoken to this, and some people spoke about this earlier today too. It's not enough, doesn't seem to be enough what we've learned from the research to minimize the risks. Instead, we have to acknowledge the risks and explain what has been done to mitigate those risks. That takes work, that takes infrastructure, that takes training, but we have the system in place, so if we have a plan and if we know what it is that we're working with, then we can, implement it on whatever scale ends up being ends up being possible within the budget. So it could be a series of small improvements to address small concerns, or it could be a matter of really building the kind of larger infrastructure that ends up being much more severe.
Thank you. I asked the question for two reasons. Number one, to get the information about the libraries, but because people across the state and where I'm working in New York City are all talking about doing pop-up kiosk, or what do you want to call it, and this issue is massive. So, and these are places that not like libraries that have already major infrastructure. That's why this issue is very, very important. The cost of it is what I want to.
Greta, have you mapped the respective infrastructure from a series of different types of organizations on internet connectivity? Because we heard from libraries, we heard from some larger community-based organizations. Commissioner Reardon testified she would offer up her 96 career centers. The small business development centers at SUNY are 32 centers. Have you mapped it out so you can do what Commissioner Simmons and others are really looking for, which is, okay, if you had to target investment in certain areas,
Believe me, CUNY and SUNY
where the heck are they?
Right, saying not us.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes that's a recommendation. Maybe they don't want to be us, but us may be the answer.
I said that to them.
But have you done that so we know how to make recommendations on targeting, some upstate library associate? How do we map it? Yeah.
So what we did was we did a qualitative and quantitative digital risk assessment, in which we sent out a survey that surveyed, I think, 80 institutions, including libraries, and asked about, what their IT setup looked like, what OS they were using, what kinds of devices they had, et cetera. We also conducted a number of qualitative interviews with folks who run anchor institutions. And essentially, our guidelines are based on that survey. So getting from our research to a dollar amount shouldn't be too difficult. But what we did hear from our security researchers is that they don't advise essentially throwing open the barn doors and allowing people to just use whatever setup is there, because there are persistent risks, and those are outlined, exhaustively in the research. But they get at everything from data protocols and data security. So if you have metadata, session data sitting around on machines, then data, even if it's anonymous, going to the Census Bureau can be re-identified using, advanced data analytics techniques. So guarding against things like that, and then guarding against things like fake or malicious websites. So that gets us to the recommendation that.
And handhelds?
Well, yeah, and we don't actually know what any mobile interface will look like. That's one of the key questions that we've been asking the Census Bureau for months and have not received an answer. So we really don't know what the mobile interface, how it will behave, or how to prepare for that interaction.
Yeah, I just have a question. I mean, somebody was discussing the fact that the libraries could help you send pictures through Facebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, in terms of security,
right.
I mean, first off, for example, several of the browsers now are encrypted. They automatically encrypt.
Right.
Gmail's encrypted. I guess I'm a little dubious about the concern on, the security concern for collecting census data, which is basically not like Facebook or not like, like say you go in and buy something at Amazon. I mean, what are the, and I'm sure you could do that at most libraries. Exactly what security do they have for that, which is a much more sensitive set of data than whether or not you're 62 and, white. I mean, I think that I'm a little concerned that this whole digital thing, or we've got to, lock up the barn door, so because the census is coming, this dangerous census is coming, when people are sitting around giving out, everything, possible at this point. And I guess I'm a little dubious about this whole exercise.
Yeah, we certainly don't encourage people to give out everything at every point. I think that the thing that we're seeing is that when people are not aware that the census is digital, they are more nervous about it. And so the ability to say it is digital and here are some precautions, that is what we're recommending. And furthermore, I think the question is not about one particular data set, but rather the risk of re-identification using multiple data sets. And so that's why we would advise something like using a device like a Chromebook or a Chrome tablet, because in that case, you're not mixing session data or log data, or it's not available on the same device.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you all for, yes.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Dallas. I'm the director of the Southern Adirondack Library System. Eric Trahan and I, our two systems share an ILS and virtual private networks. And in our libraries in the 8 counties, we can be as secure as we can be, that there are locked down computer workstations, not Wi-Fi, but locked down where there is a great degree of security. But what I wanted to share with you is that some of our libraries are only open 12 hours a week. Some are only open 20 hours a week. So for libraries to be doing this, which is important, there is a cost to the libraries and the budgets. I'm also going to share that one of the libraries in my system, their operating fund is about $35,000 a year. They don't have the capacity to add staff to have extra hours. It's important, and we want to be participants, but there are some economic barriers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming today and presenting your testimony. This has been very instructive for the commission. This has to be a bottom-up process because ultimately this is a community-by-community process. So we thank you for making your time in the middle of the morning to come. Thank you to the staff of the Rockefeller Institute for helping with the Complete Count Commission, and thank you for all of our to all of our commissioners for our effort. We are getting requests. This is our last official public hearing, but we are getting requests to go to other parts of the state. So we are going to be doing a summer tour. Rosanna and I are going to be touring together on a boat probably into different parts of our community. And so please Finger Lakes for Andy. So please keep checking back on our website. We'll be announcing additional dates. And then hopefully we'll be making recommendations in short order to the state as part of our mandate. So thank you very much for attending and have a great day, and thank you for participating.